Hi, everyone. I'm pleased to introduce our second keynote speaker today, Richard Murray from ORCA Computing. Nice to see you again, Richard. The floor is
Thanks,
yours.
Rosalie. Thanks a lot. Yeah. So really happy to be here. Thanks, everyone. And thank you for joining. So today I'm going to tell you mostly a lot on the career side. So yeah, we are sponsoring this, but I won't choose to tell you too much about what ORCA Computing is doing. I've got a few slides on that. And in fact, if you want to find out more about what we're doing, we've got a number of our team members who are going to be joining the booth later on. I thought I'd take the opportunity, just because I know how hard careers are, to sort of give my own impressions about how it works. Because myself, I've had actually sort of quite somewhat of an interesting career, doing lots of different things. So graduating from a PhD, going into companies, going into government, going into startups. And I like to just try and sort of give you a bit of a heads up about what that's like. And I think that's quite important because, I mean, frankly, it relates back to ORCA because we recruit people. But what I like is to make, when people do join us, it a decision that they know and they're informed about, and they join us for the right reasons. But also because sort of supporting people's careers is something that I think is incredibly important. And in fact, the advice that's out there at the moment, maybe is not that clear. It's not actually that easy to decide how you make those first steps, particularly. And I guess part of my talk is focused on people leaving academia, and to sort of demystify and make you less worried about the fact that you might be leaving academia and potentially joining a company. So hopefully you'll see from me a few sort of steps that I took, and hopefully allowing you to understand better how it works and what a career looks like. So the first thing I'll say is just this awesome XKDC comic that I saw a long time ago. And this is completely true, right? So when you do your degree or whatever, like, you find that actually a ton of classes, a ton of homework that you've done, all of it sort of turns out to be sort of useful. But what's really cool is not really as useful as you discovering what you really like doing outside of what's technically classed as work. So, okay, XKDC said, 1 weekend messing around with Perl. I would say, actually, weirdly, I took conferences on photonics in biological systems that helped me get my first job, or whatever. You sort of end up finding out through your sort of side activities what you really enjoy doing. And it's always a nice sort of piece of a career advice, is to try and do for a career what you enjoy doing in your spare time. So I guess in the case of XKDC, the person really found out that they really enjoyed messing around with Perl. So I guess their career made sense to be messing around in Perl. And many of you might be technically orientated, so you might spend your time messing around with like optics stuff or electronics in your spare time. So it makes sense to try and make that a career. And as a heads up, I spent my sort of spare time just really being excited about technology and being really excited about applying new technology, not really focusing on so much what that technology is, but focusing on how it relates to the way that we like to work and be. So sort of really making the connection between technology and people. And I'll sort of go on to show you a bit about how that works. And that sort of led me into sort of a bit on the sort of technical innovation side, and then sort of sales, and then in the end running a company. So key piece of advice number one: work out what you really like to do and try and focus your career around that, rather than listening too much to what your mum might want to say, what your teacher might think, or your professor, or any of those people who's sort of shouldn't really have too much business messing around in what matters the most to you, which is your career. So my career started in academia. So probably a lot like you, I spent 3.5, 4 years of my life messing around in an AMO lab. So this is the picture of my magneto-optical trap, which many of you will be familiar with. So I sort of, from the ground up, set up an AMO lab doing magneto-optical trapping, and trying to apply, new types of optical pulses to magneto-optical traps to try and get them to do sort of quantum-y things. But to be honest with you, spend a lot of my time chasing down other problems other than just like what the quantum stuff is doing. So I want to reassure you, as much as my career digressed from that, I started a lot like probably what you're doing, in a lab, not seeing daylight, and having a lot of fun messing around with stuff. But actually, I will say, and I'm really confident in saying this, that academia was not for me. And I think it's really important that you don't feel pressured to only work or consider life inside academia. And really the reason for that is that for me, academia is sort of this somewhat weird environment. Like, professors are weird beasts, right? They sort of have very strong opinions. It's not actually that sort of inducive to creativity, like trying out being sort of who you are or expressing your own ideas. And also academia sort of lacked a human element. You develop a lot of technology. None of that, as what happens in the commercial side, relates to people. Like, okay, you've developed a new idea for a technology. The thing critical to any company is understanding how that technology will be bought by someone, like why someone would be motivated, either because it helps spare them some time, or because they like a new app, or because they're interested in developing it. All in a company, it all relates to people. So for me, and I think it's really important to stress that not being comfortable or not seeing a career in academia is completely fine. I was also that person. I didn't like academia. I couldn't wait to leave, frankly. So I went from academia to work in industry, and the industry I chose was actually a technical consultancy company called TTP, based just outside Cambridge in the UK. And TTP is a little bit like a baptism by fire. It's sort of the interview process is really hard. It's like a 3-day sort of Google style sort of grilling interview. But once you're in, you sort of get to apply your many skill sets. For me, in terms of designing optical systems, to many, many different types of customer projects. So it's sort of left up to you to go out and sell your own ideas to major multinationals. And then also, once those ideas, or if and when those ideas have been sold, to try and actually deliver on them. So I did a bunch of really cool stuff, actually. I helped develop nanostructured coatings for Oakley sunglasses. So that's a picture of the Oakley offices, and it really does look like that. You turn up to a place in California, and there's this sort of meeting room that looks like a space, sort of science fiction space center. But we were doing some really cool work, basically, developing nanostructured anti-reflection coatings for Oakley, and they were interested in all sorts of optical filters for sunglasses. So it's pretty cool. Taking that same technology, I then went and did a bit of work for Boeing, applying nanostructured coatings, not optical anymore, but the same technology, to the outside of Boeing aircraft. So I got the opportunity to see the world's largest factory. So this is the Boeing factory in Seattle. So again, sort of taking some optical stuff, but applying it to still technology, but in a completely different field. And that seemed very natural. It's very easy to see how you do that. I then had some pretty weird and wacky projects. I did work for Coca-Cola for a small project, looking at whether they could laser ablate the foam that comes off filling lines. So imagine these bottles of Coca-Cola, or in fact, Coca-Cola were really interested in cranberry juice. The bottles of cranberry juice are flying through the line, and they're trying to fill them very quickly, and it generates a ton of foam. And Coca-Cola were interested, and I kid you not, in whether you could laser ablate the foam away, because this foam was like Willy Wonka. This foam was going everywhere, and they actually had to stop the production line because of all this foam. So they wanted me to look at femtosecond lasers and aiming them at cranberry juice foam. Okay, it didn't work, but it's a cool idea of a project. And then finally, the one on the bottom right is with Gillette. So I worked with Gillette on these little plastic shave guards, and how they could help people get a more comfortable shave. So just if you're wondering how on earth I ended up looking at razor blades, this is quite a nice example of how cross-cutting your skills as a quantum physicist probably are. In order to really be successful in making a razor blade work, you've really got to try and actually model how a razor blade cutting a hair on your face works. And that also involves some quite complicated non-Newtonian modeling of skin, which is actually a really weird mechanical material. And so we did a lot of, it's actually quite complicated modeling of skin and razor blades, and actually came up with a new product, this little plastic little strip that went on the back of razor blades. But the reason I'm going into all this detail is just to really elaborate how cross-cutting and how versatile quantum skills are. Because how did I end up doing this? Well, I'd spent some time messing around with finite element analysis during my PhD. I spent a bunch of time looking at imaging systems. We ended up actually taking photos of this thing, and just general analytical skills were really relevant to actually weirdly designing razor blades, probably far better than anyone who'd done a mechanical engineering degree or something like that. So even if you're not thinking about a career in quantum, just really trust me that your skills on the analytical side are really important and very sort of sought after in the industry. Okay, I left a consultancy. I left TTP. In the end, it was a little bit too aggressive for me. Consultants are sort of very, it was a very sort of you're your own agent and you've got to sell your own work. So it's a very sink and swim environment. And I went to go and work for UK government. So I went to go and work for Innovate UK, and actually had the sort of privilege of launching. I was sort of back then one of the only quantum people who had spent time in a company. And so Innovate UK sort of targeted me to be the person who could sort of be knowledgeable about the company side of things and what it was like to work in a company, but also form strategy around what a quantum program, a 270 million pound quantum program should look like. So joining government, and again, a different career perspective, you're sort of in this completely different environment where the things that you're doing are really important. Like I wrote some really important sort of strategy documents and policy documents, but ultimately it's sort of a lot of it is just you're a cog in a wheel. And so, you know, I delivered this report and it took a lot of effort and a lot of a lot of work on my part. And then that's it. All you do is just write a document and then you just go, right, there you go. There's my document written. So it's sort of cool on one hand because you're doing really important things, which are incredibly important. But on the other hand, your ownership of the problem is like 1%, like you're a cog in a wheel, which is very cool. And obviously government moves you very far away from the technical side of things, but the problem solving skills are still there. They're still important. And it's still quite cool to apply them in this like quite different environment of policy making. So after leaving government, I went to go and work for a company called E2V, or Teledyne E2V. And so now I was sort of back doing technology. So Teledyne were developing gravity sensors using cold atoms. So the thing I'd done during my PhD, but actually by now, I'd sort of spent about 6 or 7 years not doing cold atom physics. So I really wasn't the person to be in the lab building these systems. So my job was really sort of very different now. It was about on the maybe management and business side, trying to structure programs, trying to structure the team and maybe lead the team and also work on engaging with customers on this technology. And I really want to stress that aspect of things because this is really what's become my career now. On the technical side, and actually understanding and maybe even getting involved in the technical side of things, but now very, very focused on the human side of things. Like you have a customer, how is that customer feeling? How are you going to sell a technology to that customer? What do they really care about? You know, you have a team of people working for you. How do those team members feel? Like what's going on with them? Do they like what they're doing? All of these things are very technically related, and I love being involved in technology. But all of a sudden, you've got this completely new perspective, which for me is the thing that gets me out of bed in the day. It's all about the human side of things. And I think going through academia, you're sort of forced to, deliberately not value human interactions. Like you're forced into this one stereotype of a technical person being someone who maybe isn't sort of that worried about people. And for me, that didn't work. So as soon as I got back into industry and got to work in an environment where the people side of things really matters, that made all the difference. And so, key piece of advice number 2, again, do what you want and don't feel like you have to be stereotyped in this particular way, especially if you're a technical person. So industry involved moving to sort of more on the people side. And then frankly, in my spare time working at Teledyne, I also had the great opportunity to reconnect with some academics in the field of quantum optics. And that's when we started ORCA Computing. So back in 2019, we launched this company doing photonic-based quantum computing systems. So we do everything in ORCA. And I'll say again, I won't go on into too much detail on what we do because we do have a number of team members who'll be at the booth later to elaborate a lot more on what we do. But you might imagine, so we do everything from building optical setups, so breadboarded type stuff, all the way through into mounting those breadboarded things inside of well-engineered packages. So a lot of on the cutting edge of quantum optics, but also on the maybe optical engineering side, we do all of that. We build really cutting edge, very, very fast electronic FPGA and maybe one day ASIC electronic control systems. So we have sort of skills and people doing that. And we also have a very large activity on the theory and application side, obviously looking at new types of error correction codes, on resource state modeling and all of that type of stuff. And ORCA is pretty cool because it brings those 3 different fields together. And I really like it because it's an environment where everyone's sort of slightly different. And we try and avoid speaking too technically because there'll always be someone who sort of doesn't really understand what that stuff. But frankly, my role, again, not technical and not to put you off too much, is not doing any of those things. I leave that to the technical side. I spend a lot of my time talking to investors in meetings, talking to customers. I do spend a lot of my time in front of spreadsheets, which I love. I love a sort of really accurate sort of budget spreadsheet. And yes, we are still a small company, and so yes, I still do the hoovering. So there's still a lot of activities that I get involved in, like hoovering and stuff like that. So a little few wrap up words of advice, if you like, if you don't mind me sort of patronizing slightly. I do find that the first steps that you take in your career, the most important thing you really need to do is work out what you really want. And I say this sort of quite carefully, because I actually find it's actually quite hard to find out what you really, really want. So maybe to break it down into a few sort of smaller questions, like, do you think that you want to go and work for a big corporate or a small startup? They're very different. Do you want a high risk, fast moving, sort of potentially high reward career, or do you want something more stable? Like, do you want a 9 to 5, or do you want the possibility you might do like 9 to 3, and then the next day you might work till midnight? What do you want? Do you want to be left alone at work, like locked in a lab and left alone, or do you want to work around people, and do you want all of your work to be sort of dependent on what other people think? Do you want to be a cog in the machine, or do you want to be independent? Do you want to relocate? More on the sort of practical side of things. Do you like where you are? Do you want to move away from your family? Do you have a girlfriend or a wife or a husband? Do they mind moving with you? And do you want to travel? Do you want to be away from home regularly? And all of these things weirdly matter just as much as the other things. And maybe you don't even know what you want, and maybe you might make the wrong choice, but that's okay. You just make a choice and you find out something new. You find out what it's like working in a big company, and you find out that you don't like a big company. Who cares? You move. And this is the other thing, like, worry about your career, but don't worry about it too much, because at the end of the day, moving jobs is not that hard, really. So just try some different things out. And then the final slide from me, what have I learned? So, from personal experience, the first thing to really say, be confident. And I will really say, especially going through an academic environment where your confidence is really not built up. It's really hard to be confident in an academic environment. But trust me, you have every reason to be confident, because the skills you have, analytical, technical skills, are really sought after. So be really confident in sort of, in how much you've done already and how much you know. But try not to be arrogant. Like, you don't know everything, especially if you've just joined completed a PhD. So be really willing to learn. In my experience, be willing to broaden your skills. Try not to be too selective in terms of, okay, I only want to do this one very tiny thing. Try and broaden it out as much as you can. But also be aware that no two companies are identical. So, one company might be completely different from another one. So really try and do your research. Try and know a bit more about the company before you look about joining them. And now I'm a bit, maybe a bit too honest here. Please don't think that people in industry are the stupid ones. It's a sort of trait that academics have, which is completely wrong. The people that I've worked with in industry are probably the most intelligent people that I've ever met. So it's definitely not the case that people in academia are the smart ones. And finally, be proactive. So do sort of send out CVs, get on the phone, hustle people. And most importantly, please never stop learning. So this, especially in quantum physics, any one of us, if anyone says that they've stopped learning, like, move on. Like, never stop, never settle for a position where you're not learning as much as you can, because that's the major trait, most important trait you have, is absorb new concepts and learn and adapt. So please never stop learning. And I think that's it. So last thing to say, yeah, join us. So come by the booth later, talk to people about what ORCA Computing is like. We have a ton of different roles open. We've just raised our Series A, although it's not publicized. So yeah, join us. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. I love your talks, you know that, and I cannot get tired of you saying how you love a good spreadsheet. It's like,
yeah, well, I think either that, or like, I never get tired of saying I hate academia. Move on from academia. It sucks. Sorry, but that's something I shouldn't say.
I love it. No, very good advice there. Yeah, never stop learning. And yeah, it's like, if you don't like what you're doing, just change it. It's like, you don't need to stay where you are. It's not the end of the world. Change, and you can always come back to academia. That's another thing. So exactly. Everything is possible. Great.
Careers is this thing where they're incredibly important, but at the same time, they're important for the body of decisions you make, not for each individual decision, if that makes sense.
Correct. There is a good question from Prachi. He or she said, what are skills that you see are missing for most applicants? I think that's a very good question.
Oh, wow. Okay. I'll say something really simple, which some applicants miss, and it's really important to us, and that's to brush up on the company that you're applying to. And I'll say this isn't the one thing that everyone misses, but it's a really annoying thing when it happens. When someone applies to us and we ask them, hey, what do you know about ORCA Computing? And they have a complete blank. Oh, I don't know, optics, isn't it? Or no, I don't know. It sort of says a lot.
I just clicked there.
Yeah, it's like, could you not have gone on our website or read some of our papers? Or so I think maybe one thing to say is make sure you brush up on what the company's doing before you apply. Is pretty important. I'd say, I don't know, in terms of the skill that we see missing the most, it really varies because we employ so many different skills. I guess, currently one of the hardest roles we have to meet is someone who's worked with products before or has actually brought something to market. But I wouldn't beat yourself up over that if you don't have that. That's the golden skill, someone who's actually brought something to market and has overcome all of the challenges in doing that. But that's our optical engineering role, in case you happen to have brought a photonic, an optical component product to market. That's probably the toughest one we have to fill.
Great. Yeah, Richard, are you going to be at the booth later?
Yes, I will. And so will a lot of the team members from all of our different areas, from the architecture side, from the quantum optics side, and everything else.
Perfect. So thanks again. Amazing talk. And yeah, everyone just go and chat with Richard and the rest of the ORCA team later on.
Thank you.
Thank you. Everyone, we are going to open all the booths now, but at the same time, we have our short talks coming up next. So yeah, just enjoy. There are different activities, and see you soon.